furniture is, most of the furniture is 17th century oak to fit in with the age of the house. Some of it is not as old as that, but it's all period furniture. There's been a lot of restoration work done here, but one of the things we think is the original here is the fireplace. And one of the reasons it makes us think it's original is the witch marks here, carved into the lintel. And these were carved into the exits to houses, like fire, chimney breasts, door frames, window frames, by carpenters in the 17th century to take the evil spirits out of the house. Now, the one we have here is the letters MVV, which stands for Mary, Virgin of Virgins. And they tended to come in standard forms. But these are the ones we have. This is a meat hook. They'd been out and trapped some rabbits, hares, whatever, they would hang them up on there to clip. Now this chair is the only piece of furniture in the house that's not original, because it's a replica of the chair they gave the Earl of Devonshire to sit in when he came. It would be their best chair, and because he was their local nobility, they would give him the best chair. Unfortunately, it made its way into the hands of the Duke of Devonshire in the 20th century, and he put it in Hardwick Hall, and it's still there. So Chatsworth Estate felt a pang of guilt that they'd given away a chair, so their carpenters made us the replica. Now this narrow door is called a squeezer door. And this was the entrance into the barns and the stables, and it was to stop the big animals like cows and horses coming through and sharing your dinner. It was originally blocked off, but when they did the renovations in 1988, they rediscovered it.
Whittington on the outskirts of Chesterfield. Revolution House. Crowded and overshadowed by the buildings which have grown up around it since the day which ensured its place in history. A building which, although rather smaller today, has now been renovated. The story of the events which took place here 300 years ago has been handed down through generations by the people of Old Whittington and recorded in the histories of the families involved. Here, in 1688, at what was then the Cock and Pynot Inn, a group of noblemen, the Earl of Devonshire from Chatsworth, the Earl of Danby from Kiverton, John Darcy from Aston, and according to some accounts, Lord Delamere from Dunham Massey Hall in Cheshire, met to plot the overthrow of a king. James II succeeded his brother Charles II in 1685. His reign was to last only 3 years. As a convert to the Catholic faith, he wanted to improve the lot of his fellow Catholics. At that time, anyone who was not a member of the Church of England was discriminated against by law. They could not hold public office, and might even be fined or imprisoned for practicing their faith. James tried to persuade Parliament and the Church of England to support his plans to repeal these laws. When they proved unwilling, James used what he considered his sovereign rights to dispense with the law, allowing Catholics to hold office in the army, government, and judiciary. He pressurized MPs and clergy in an attempt to gain support for his reforms, replacing those in office who did not agree with him, considering them disloyal to the crown. Many feared that James was modeling his style of administration too closely on King Louis XIV. Louis was an absolute monarch. Having all power in his personal control, he ruled France virtually alone. Until the end of 1687, James expected to be succeeded by his Protestant daughter, Mary, who was married to the Dutch prince, William of Orange. He could only hope that any concessions he gained for the Catholics would remain in force after his death. James sought the support of Protestant dissenters by issuing a Declaration of Indulgence. This declaration gave to them and to Catholics freedom of worship and the opportunity to hold office. Knowing that Parliament would not support his policies, he campaigned to have elected MPs who would approve his reforms. When it was discovered that his queen was expecting a child, and there was the possibility of a Catholic successor to continue his work, James became more determined than ever to pursue his plans. James was attempting to use his authority and position to influence the outcome of the elections. But the elections were never held, for England was invaded. William of Orange, James's nephew and son-in-law, was regarded by some as the only hope of ending what they considered the threats of Catholicism and absolute monarchy. William too was alarmed by developments in England, and particularly feared that James's relationship with Louis would lead to English support of the French against him and his allies in the war which was threatening Europe. However, the invasion of England would be a risky venture. William himself might lose Holland, and those who followed him might suffer the same fate as those who had taken part in the rebellion of just 3 years earlier, when the Duke of Monmouth, the illegitimate son of Charles II, had tried to seize the throne. Landing at Lyme Regis, he raised an army from among the ordinary people of the West Country, but James's army, with the support of Parliament, swiftly put down the revolt. The Duke of Monmouth was executed, and the infamous Judge Jeffreys and others were sent to conduct the assizes, and were ruthless in punishing the rebels. 800 were transported to the West Indies, and over 300 were hanged. The price of failure was high. If William was to succeed, he would need considerable English support. William's supporters set to work building a network of sympathizers among the nobility and the army. Meetings like the one at Revolution House were held, and letters were sent secretly from England to Holland, some in code, some even in invisible ink. Until Admiral Herbert, disguised as an ordinary sailor, brought the confirmation that William needed. A letter signed in code by 7 noblemen, inviting William, as they saw it, to save the nation. Among the signatories were the Earl of Devonshire and the Earl of Danby. Previously political enemies, they and many others put aside their differences to support William. The tide of public opinion was turning against James, and opposition was mounting. 7 bishops, unwilling to support the Declaration of Indulgence, were put on trial. Despite the king's influence over the courts, the bishops were released. Rumours were circulating that the new prince was not James's son, but had been smuggled into the Queen's room in a warming pan. And, to make matters worse, pamphlets were flooding into the country attacking the king's policies. William originally planned to land his forces on Humberside, where they were to rendezvous with English supporters. However, late in the day the plans were changed. Aided by the prevailing winds, William's ships escaped the English fleet, and on November the 5th, William landed at Tor Bay, where the sufferings of Monmouth's followers had not been forgotten. Gathering his supporters, William marched to meet James's army. But discouraged by the defections of his officers, James had ordered his army to retreat and had fled to London. The news which greeted him there was bleak. There had been uprisings in the Midlands and the North. Lord Delamere had taken Chester, the Earl of Danby, York, and the Earl of Devonshire, Nottingham, where Anne, James's own daughter, had gone to join the rebels. Even though he still had large forces at his disposal, James was demoralized and fearful. He arranged the escape of the Queen and his baby son, and sent ambassadors to William. Before they returned, James set off to join his family in France, hurling the Great Seal into the River Thames so that official documents could not be issued. However, his escape attempt was frustrated by a group of fishermen, and he was brought back to London. Although some still hoped that he would be able to retain his title and a settlement reached, with William's agreement, James departed secretly for France on December the 22nd, without a battle being fought. William took control of the country until a parliament could be called. In February 1689, this parliament determined to offer the throne to William and Mary as joint sovereigns, and drew up a Declaration of Rights, whose 13 points outlined the relationship between Parliament and the King. The Protestant succession was ensured, and safeguards were put in place which would prevent any future sovereign from attempting to become an absolute monarch. This declaration, which later became a statute, still forms an important part of the British Constitution. Although William was a firm believer in royal authority and controlled foreign policy, he ruled within the law with Parliament's assent. On the 11th of April 1689, William and Mary were crowned at Westminster Abbey. The Earl of Devonshire had the honour of carrying the crown, and his daughter was privileged to be a train-bearer to the Queen. In 1694, the Earls of Devonshire and Danby received dukedoms for their services to William. The first Duke's descendants are still resident in Derbyshire, and a plaque at Chatsworth reminds the visitor that the present house was commenced in 1688, the year of the Revolution. The family was represented at the commemorations of the centenary and bicentenary of the Revolution in Old Whittington, and continue their interest in the house to the present day.
Thank you very much.
Revolution House remains as an important feature of local heritage, and a reminder of a momentous event in English history, which still has implications for our lives today.